Welcome back. In part 1, we set the stage by looking into the benefits and trade-offs for the migration of our ASP.NET Core MVC application to Blazor WebAssembly. In this episode, we will set up our complete end-to-end development workflow from scratch together. We've got a lot to get through, so let's get started. Okay, so let's just review briefly what it is we want to try and achieve in this episode. As mentioned previously, we'll start with the hosting. So we want to select a web hosting service which is no frills, no fuss, and enables us to easily deploy our Blazor WebAssembly application to our users. We'll then select and initialize a code repo with a Blazor WASM application, boilerplate application initially, that we can then build on in future episodes. And we'll bolt onto that a DevOps pipeline for continuous integration and continuous delivery, continuous deployment. And what this is going to enable us to do, both in this episode and in future episodes, is to build incremental code changes that are made frequently and reliably that push those changes to our web hosting service. So we've got a lot to get through in this episode. Let's get to it. So we have elected for Azure Static Web Apps as the hosting service. Now, Azure Static Web Apps is a service that automatically builds and deploys full stack web apps to Azure from a code repository. Now, you can see from this image that the workflow of Azure Static Web Apps is tailored to a developer's daily workflow. Apps are built and deployed based on code changes, and this is great because what it means is that when we create an Azure Static Web App resource, Azure interacts directly with GitHub or Azure DevOps to monitor a branch of our choosing. And every time we push a commit or accept a pull request into the watched branch, a build automatically runs and your web app and API deploy to Azure, which is just awesome. Now, static web apps are commonly built using libraries and web frameworks, and we could have opted for Angular, we could have opted for React, Svelte, Vue, but we've opted for Blazor WebAssembly, where server-side rendering isn't required. And our Blazor WebAssembly app will include HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and image assets that make up the application. Now, with a traditional web server, these assets would be served from a single server alongside any required API endpoints. With static web apps, static assets are separated from a traditional web server and are instead served from points geographically distributed around the world. This distribution makes serving files much faster as files are physically closer to end users. And in addition, API endpoints are hosted using a serverless architecture, which avoids the need for a full back-end server altogether. Okay, so this leads us to our next point, which is to select a code repo, and we have selected GitHub. Now, we discussed earlier that we could use Azure DevOps or GitHub with Azure Static Web Apps. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about what GitHub is and who owns GitHub, there's actually a really nice video link on the website, which I would definitely recommend watching, because it will just give you like a super quick overview of how GitHub is currently being used in the world and what the advantages of it are. So we've chosen GitHub as our code repository. So the first thing that we want to actually do is create a repository, which is super simple. We're in github.com, literally just hit on this create repository. Now I'm already logged in, so you'll need to create a GitHub account if you haven't got one. Here's my GitHub account, and then we need to give it a name. So we're migrating the assembly soft MVC ASP.NET Core Web Apps. So let's stick with assembly soft in the name, and then we'll give it a name like static web app for now, and we'll come back and put a description in a little bit later, and we'll keep it as public. We'll add a README file which is going to help describe what our repository is all about, and also add it in markdown format so that we can describe and have a nice visual to viewers of that repository. We'll add a git ignore template as well, and there should be one for Visual Studio in there, which there is. Let's select that one. We'll leave the license for now because it's really not important for this project, and then we'll go ahead and create repository. And that's it. So we've now got a repository. You can see that the markdown file there for the README is, or just contains a heading, and if we wanted to, we could edit that, and maybe we'll just put in another little bit of info. We could just say this is the migration project from ASP.NET Core MVC to Blazor Web Assembly, and we'll just commit that change. Update README is fine for the message just for now. Commit directly to the main branch, which is absolutely fine. We've only got one branch, so we don't need to worry. And then we've just got just a bit of a description as to what it is that we're doing here for anyone that comes to this repo. So now that we've actually got our repository created, we can actually create a static web app from the Azure portal. So let's just go to the portal now, and we've reached, if you want to just start this from scratch, portal.azure.com. And then what it's asking us to do is to sign in with an account. Well, we're signed into GitHub, so let's just use that. So what it's just saying here is that do we want to allow Microsoft to access this GitHub account, which we do. So let's just go for that. Let's authorize it. So we're getting a few questions here. This is kind of new since the last time I did this, but obviously with the advent of AI and machine learning, it's trying to kind of help to present you with the features that you're most likely going to want to access. I think we probably want to access everything, especially with this series. But let's just skip this for now because there's probably quite a few here that apply. But it's not important for us to do this right now. We can come back and streamline this a bit later. Great. So it's kind of got a bit of a wizard tour here, but we're just going to skip that and just get straight into our portal dashboard. Awesome. Next step is to actually create a resource. So if we just do a search here for static, one of the good things about Azure Static Web Apps is that we can choose a free plan, and it does come with an awful lot of features, as we're going to find out, such as being able to associate a custom domain name. The bandwidth is fairly generous in terms of provisioning and serving files, so we should be able to get away with pretty much no spend for this application that we want to create. Let's go ahead and create a static web app, and it's defaulted my subscription to this Azure subscription 1, which we could change the name of, but we'll just leave it as it is for now. So I think we'll create a new resource group. I like to go with a naming convention for resource groups, RG. Now, normally I'd probably put in a region here for a lot of resources, but based on the fact that this is an Azure Static Web App, it's actually going to utilize the benefits of the global region. So there's no need really to put in a specific region, because what we want to benefit from is having the DLLs downloaded to the geolocation which is closest to where the user's browser actually is browsing from. So in this case, I think what we'll just do is just keep it fairly generic and go for resource group web. And I think we'll go for that. And then we've actually got here the hosting plan. This is quite nice actually, because as we mentioned earlier, we've got these different options for our source for our repository. Now it has got other on there, but the two that we covered are Azure DevOps, and obviously we're using GitHub, but it's quite nice that that's here, because it just means that the configuration files are going to be available to us. Now we are signed in to the portal with our GitHub account, but as you can see here, it's not picking that one up. We've actually got to associate it now, so we'll do that now. I'm going to click to log in, and it's now authorizing Azure App Service to be able to access the account, the repo, the GitHub repo. So this is now another step. Earlier we did the Azure portal, and that's why we were able to log in with that account, but now it actually wants to authorize the Azure App Service to be able to access the account as well, in order to build this workflow, which, as we discussed earlier, is all about watching changes on one of our branches that we select to perform the build and deployment based on commits. So we're going to authorize that now. That's quite nice. So that's now picked up the correct GitHub account. And then what we should find in here is it's defaulting the organization just to the account name, because it's just a personal account. And then if we go into repositories, there we are. There's the repo that we just created. So that's really nice and super simple. It's also defaulting to the main branch. That's all there is in that repository at the moment, because we haven't created anything else. But as you can see, that is super simple. We've chosen the free hobby personal projects as well. And then we've got this build preset. So we can actually have a quick look in here, and we've actually got a Blazor framework build preset. So what that means is that some of the configuration is going to be tuned to the fact that we're using Blazor, which will just cut down on a little bit of work. If we have a quick look at the documentation for these presets, what we're going to find is that there are a number of front-end frameworks here, and they've all got different options for things like the output location. You know, if you're building Angular, it's the dist and then the app name / browser in this case. But if we go down to Blazor, we'll see that for Blazor WASM, it's the dub root is the output location. So going back to the portal, if we actually flick these build presets and go to Angular, for example, it's actually populating the application API location, which is irrelevant for us for this migration at the moment, but then it's got the output location as well after the build, which is required for the deployment to pick up these distributable files, which in our case will be DLLs and the assets. But let's just flick that back to Blazor, and then what we can actually do is have a look at what the output file or what the workflow file looks like, which is essentially a build and deployment YAML file, a YAML script. We can have a look at that here, and you can actually see there that this is the CI/CD YAML build and deployment pipeline. So everything is done here end to end. We can actually see a few things here if we look without getting too detailed, but on push of the branch main or a pull request on the type main, then it basically runs this build and deploy job. We can see here that it actually performs a build, secrets are used, and then it actually performs a deployment as well, and closes the pull request as part of the successful deployment as well. So this is quite sweet, really, the fact that it's doing this end-to-end build and deploy based on the fact that we've actually modified something in the main branch, which is exactly what we said we wanted to do. We wanted a DevOps pipeline that could streamline our development workflow, so that as we make these small steps, these small changes, these incremental changes to our application, we can actually see the results built and deployed, which means that we cut down on risk, and we get to see the current state of the application at every stage as we develop. So this is really good. So that's going to get generated automatically by the fact that we've set these presets. Now, obviously, we could do all this ourselves, but this is really quite a nice workflow that's been provided for us out of the box, just by actually being able to select these configuration items. I think just one thing I might have missed is the name of the static web app. And this is the actual resource itself now. So here we've got the option on advanced for selecting an Azure functions and staging details. So Azure Static Web Apps does come with higher availability, as we discussed earlier, for the production environment, but we've also got the option of having a managed Azure Functions API, and this is non-prod, essentially, staging environments, and it's just really asking us where would we like to store those. So we'll go for West Europe, because that's closest to where we are in the UK. We're not going to use distributed functions just yet. So here we've got our tags. We'll give this a name of assembly soft and web, which is quite a nice way to group and find the resource group and the static web app in one nice, easy filter. And that's pretty much it. We can see that we've got the static web app, we've got a name for it, it's putting our subscription in there, the resource group that we created, which we mentioned earlier, and then we've got our tags as well. So everything's pretty much ready to go. It's just done a verification. It's essentially saying that everything is good. Let's create. That's just performing another validation now that all of these items are available, and performing some pre-deployment steps, and that looks like it's completed. Your deployment is complete. Go to resource. There we go. Bang, that's done. So we now have a resource, an Azure Static Web App resource provisioned in Azure, linked to our GitHub account, and it's just waiting now for a change to be made to the main branch in our GitHub repo in order to fire that build and deployment script as part of GitHub Actions. So let's move to having just a super quick look at the site, just to see where it's at the moment. Okay, so it's like the default boilerplate. But now what we want to do is actually move to creating the site, pushing it to GitHub, and then seeing this build and deployment workflow. So what's interesting now is if we just jump back here into GitHub, we can see that the first thing we're kind of presented with this under this GitHub Actions tab is that we've got an error. And this is quite interesting because essentially it's saying trying to validate location at GitHub Workspace client, which is what we set up for the Blazor WebAssembly app directory, but app directory location client is invalid, could not detect this directory, and that's perfectly valid because we haven't actually created a Blazor WebAssembly project yet and committed it to GitHub, so there is no client app directory that exists that the GitHub build and deployment workflow is expecting. And what's also interesting is if we just go back to the code repo, you'll notice that just a few minutes ago we added this new directory GitHub workflows with our, if we have a quick look in here, with the YAML script that we saw previewed. So this was, you know, the authorization steps that we approved were enabling the app service to actually access our GitHub account and actually generate and commit this file into the main branch, which as a result of that change actually attempted to kick off the GitHub action for us, which failed because the code's not yet provisioned in terms of the actual application. So if we now go to the code, we can see that we've got that workflows file in existence, which is great. This is the right order to do things in, to have everything prepared for the very first application commit. So now what we just need to do is put a bit more meat on the bones in terms of this repository and actually add the application code itself. So we're going to do that now. Okay, let's fire up Visual Studio and clone the project we just created in GitHub. So there's AssemblySoft Static Web App, and we'll just put it in the default location. Let's clone that. And there it is. Okay, cool. So now what we'll do is we will do a new Blazor WebAssembly project. So let's just filter these types by Blazor. Oh. Blazor Web App, Blazor WebAssembly standalone app. That's the one we're going to go for because we don't want a hosted server at the moment. We just want the front end WebAssembly app that we can use with our Azure Static Web app that we've already built, which is just expecting a client project. So let's go with that. And we want to create a new solution now. So let's call this go. And we'll keep it configured for HTTPS. We don't want to include any sample pages. We want .NET 8 long-term support, and we'll leave authentication for now because we're just dealing, as we said previously, with a brochureware site essentially. Just go ahead and create that. Let's just have a super quick look at the Git changes. So we can see here that all of these files have now been picked up by Git, but we cloned first, and we've basically added these files on top of the cloned GitHub project. So if we just go quickly to see what that looks, Static Web App that came down. We've now added a Visual Studio project folder, and we've now got our actual client application folder that's been added in here. Okay, so let's go and populate the GitHub repo now, because at the moment the only thing that exists in there is the Static Web Apps with the workflow, the GitHub Actions workflow. So what we want to do now is actually commit this project in. So we go to our changes in Git, and I'll just add a commit here, which is initial Blazor WebAssembly boilerplate. Project. Let's commit that, and then we'll push. Excellent. Right, so we could create a pull request at this point, but let's just go and have a look at GitHub now and see what's going on. Just a refresh on this. There we go. So we can see our new project folder has been added into the repo. So we've now actually got the Blazor WebAssembly project. Okay, so we have committed, we've seen the new project files in GitHub. If we come into the Azure portal, it's still saying waiting for deployment. The only thing that we've got deployed are the boilerplate files, which we had a look at a minute ago, which is this new site, but we've not actually deployed anything from our repo. So what's going on here? Let's go back to GitHub, and we can see that we have the initial Blazor WebAssembly boilerplate project committed 3 minutes ago. Okay, great. But we've got this X, which is a failure on the build. So what's going on here? So we can see that the push instigated a change to the main branch, which in turn caused the build and deploy job to run, which is failing after 22 seconds. So let's go to the details of that. That jumps into the GitHub Actions tab, and again we've got this familiar message which is saying that the location client is invalid. Now this is because when we were in the portal, we allowed the portal to decide what our project root directory was going to be named, and that was client. So if we go into the workflow and have a look at the YAML file on the build, what we're going to find in here is that it's expecting an application of client. Now we have an application of AssemblySoft Blazor WebAssembly. Now why have we done that? Why didn't we just call this client to kind of fit in with this convention? Well, we could have done. and it would have made life simple. However, we might want to have multiple types of client in this repo which are current. So we might, for example, want to have an Angular app, or we might want to kind of future-proof ourselves a little bit for another build target. And in this case, that's kind of what we're doing. So all we need to do here is update the YAML file to pick up the front end files from this project directory. So let's just go ahead and do that now. Let's edit this directly in GitHub, and let's just change this to AssemblySoft Blazor WebAssembly project. I'll just say directory. And what we'll do is commit that to the main branch. Cool. So now, if we have a look at our project, we can see that that's pending. So it's performing the checks as we speak. Let's launch that and see it actually run. Oh, this looks a bit more positive. It seems to have got a little bit further. And we can see here that it does appear to see that it's actually picking up the runtime.mono AOT compiler, and it's successfully installed the workloads that needs to build a Blazor WebAssembly application. It's now restored any packages as part of the project, the AssemblySoft Blazor WebAssembly project, and it's now attempting to do a publish to the static sites directory. So we've been running for 1 minute and 40 so far, which is pretty good because I think we were getting past 20 seconds last time. Okay, it's giving us a warning that the API directory can't be found, and as a result it won't create the Azure functions, but we didn't actually want it to do that. What we could have done actually in the portal is removed the API name there so that it wouldn't have actually attempted that check, and we can still go ahead and remove that from the YAML build file, but we can see that it's actually in progress and it's succeeded, which is quite good. So thanks for using Azure Static Web Apps. It's actually finished the upload and deployment. So what we should be able to do in theory is go back to the Azure portal and give this a little refresh. So it's still saying waiting there, but let's just give it a refresh. It says ready, which is good. So that means that it actually has a deployment there. Okay, so let's just fire up Visual Studio and run the app without debugging and just see what it looks like. So what we've got is our hosting environment, our development hosting environment running, which we can see here. And then we've got the app listening on HTTPS 7202, port 7202. So there it is. And we just do a quick refresh on that. You can see this new spinner that came as one of the later releases in .NET 8. And there we go. There's our Blazor WebAssembly app. And now, if we turn our attention super quick, being successful. So if we visit the site now via this link, you can see we've got the same experience, except it's on our Azure Static Apps.NET URI. So that's actually deployed from GitHub to Azure via an Azure Static app, which is exactly what we wanted. So let's put us in quite a good position, really. If we just have a quick look at the actions, what we're going to find is that we updated the project directory. As we said earlier, that's now succeeded. It took 2 minutes and 47 seconds to deploy. But what that means now is that every change that we make from here on in will automatically get deployed, which is great for testing, it's great for development. So we're in really good shape now for actually migrating the application, because we've got a fully deployable Blazor WebAssembly application, which is kicking off from any change that's committed to the main branch in GitHub. Well, I hope you enjoyed this second part and are looking forward to our journey together. So what will we cover next? And if you're enjoying this series, please like and subscribe to help the channel, and jam that notification bell to get notified as soon as I add new videos. I'm planning a number of really exciting topics which you won't want to miss out on. If there's any other topics that you'd like me to cover, please let me know in the comments. So in part 3, we'll start to break down our existing ASP.NET Core MVC web application and build up our first set of Blazor components. Thanks for watching.